all are doing here. You're welcome to yet another webinar of the Yaba Voice. This is the official online voice of the Federal Neuropsychiatric Hospital. It aims at providing quality mental health education to the public. And today we are looking at something very, 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 you can imagine the very that I'm putting there, very important, because it's something that is affecting all, and it's something that it's very, very prominent around us now with gross implication. And we're looking at cannabis. Yes, is there a smoke without fire? We're attempting to answer that question, and I'm really, really looking forward to this discussion today, because we are going to be answering lots of questions about, is there a smoke, or can there be a smoke without fire? Oh, the experts are here. But before we go into the discussion proper, the medical director of the Federal Neuropsychiatric Hospital, Yaba, Lagos, as well as the chief host of the Yaba Voice, Dr. Oluwayemi Cecilia Ogun, is here to formally welcome us to this webinar. Over to you, ma'am.
Good morning, everyone from across the world. Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you, Mrs. Akintoyeshe. As you have been told, we are discussing an important topic this morning. We are talking about cannabis. Now, while preparing for this webinar, there was a trending news this week, and it read, House of Reps set to legalize the use of Indian hemp for economic benefits. Spokesperson. That's from Vanguard News. And other papers across the country carried similar content. I bet no mental health professional would ever be happy about such news because of the negative impacts of this drug around us. Indian hemp, cannabis, also known as pot, hashish, marijuana, igbo, grass, weed, Mary Jane, dope, ganja, skunk, among many other names, is widely grown all over the world. And of course, we have very fertile ground for it in Nigeria. Cannabis is a psychoactive drug that is a mind-altering drug from the cannabis plant, whose geographic origin is Central Asia and India subcontinent. Some species of it are also believed to be native to North America. It has been used as a recreational and medicinal drug for centuries. People use all the parts. They use the dried leaves, seed oil, flour, and other parts for whatever purpose they want. Cannabis contains at least 426 active ingredients called cannabinoids. The most abundant ones are cannabidiol, called shortened to CBD, and delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, shortened to THC. So far, most scientific studies are focused on this CBD and THC among the 426 ingredients. Some cannabinoids can have euphoric or psychoactive effects. THC produces both these euphoric and psychoactive effects, and it is responsible for the so-called high that most people associated with cannabis. Cannabis, Indian hemp, can there be smoke without fire? To do justice to the topic are two experts in the field of drug abuse. The first person I will introduce to you is Dr. Ayanrinde, who is an associate professor of psychiatry and psychology at Queen's University, Kingston, Ontario, Canada. He is a clinical director of community psychiatry programs at Providence Care, and he oversees the mentorship program for Black medical students. He studied medicine at UCH, Ibadan, and started his postgraduate training in psychiatry at the Psychiatric Hospital, Yaba. So he's what we generally call a Yaba boy. before going to the UK, where he completed his psychiatry training at the Mosley Hospital and Institute of Psychiatry, London. After 19 years at the Mosley, where he rose to the position of clinical director and senior teacher, he took up his current position in Canada, where he's been involved in cannabis-related initiatives. He has been actively involved in cannabis education and the understanding of its impact on mental health since legalization in Canada by presentation of contemporary evidence to schools, students, faculties, clinical staff, and the interactive dissemination to patients with severe mental illness. Professor Oyedeji Ayorinde also plays critical role in cannabis education with the armed forces, Canadian Armed Forces. He has received many awards for his cannabis knowledge initiatives. He has written and presented many scientific papers on cannabis. Based on all this, his patients and youths refer to him as Professor Potts, Dr. Ganja, or the weed doctor. Dr. Ayorinde is a fellow of Royal College of Psychiatrists, UK, International Fellow of the American Psychiatric Association, and Fellow of Royal Society of Arts, and a member of the Society of Apothecaries. The second expert that I will introduce to you is Dr. Mrs. Olajumoke Koyejo, a consultant addiction psychiatrist who works at the Federal Neuropsychiatric Hospital, Yaba, Lagos. She had a medical education at the prestigious Obafemi Awolowo University, Ile-Ife, and a residency training at Federal Neuropsychiatric Hospital, Yaba. She qualified as a specialist psychiatrist by becoming a fellow of National Postgraduate Medical College of Nigeria in 2012. She further specialized in substance abuse prevention treatment, education, and policy from Virginia Commonwealth University, USA. She also has certification in tobacco prevention, treatment, protection, and evaluation from the Ontario Tobacco Research Unit, Canada. Dr. Koyejo is the coordinator of the Colombo Planned Drug Advisory Program Universal Treatment Course, UTC. She's also an international trainer of the UTC training in the Gambia, Ethiopia, and the Federal Neuropsychiatric Hospital, Yaba, Lagos, from where she has successfully coordinated the training of over 400 addiction professionals in Nigeria. Mama Colombo, as she's fondly called, works at the addiction unit of the hospital. It is the Federal Neuropsychiatric Hospital, Yaba. Ladies and gentlemen, please relax and listen as I hand you over to our moderator, Mrs. Oluwakemi Akintoyeshe. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Medical Director, for that arousing welcome. She had really opened the floor to tell us about cannabis and some of the ingredients, the active ingredients there, and some of those potent ones that seem to affect people. We will go into the discussion for today, but please note that we are also streaming live on Facebook. So if you cannot connect effectively here, you can also connect with us on Facebook. And please, it's still early to tell people, family and friends to join us on this important webinar. I tell you, this is very, very important because everywhere, every nook and cranny, all around, even in Nigeria today, you will see people smoking cannabis. And one of the things I'm so concerned about is the issue of active smokers and passive smokers. We'll get into all of these as we go on in this discussion. To open discussion for us is Dr. Koyejo. She will be discussing or telling us more about this topic that we'll be looking at, cannabis. Is there smoke without fire? Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Akintoyeshe, and thank you very much, my MD. Well, I would have loved to share my slides, but Mrs. Akintoyeshe said I should not use that people would download that. She wants everybody to listen to me. So I would, but it's meant to be a discussion. Yeah, I'll start by talking about cannabis, introducing cannabis plants to us. It's been published as a complex plant and it has over 426 chemical entities, out of which 60 are psychoactive cannabinoids, which have opposing effects. In one plant, there are chemical entities that have opposing effects. Okay, let me define what psychoactive substances are. These are pleasure-giving substances, or they give desired effects. They are easy habit-forming, and they work primarily on the brain, where they alter the brain function, and thus resulting in temporary alteration of mood, that is how we feel, our sensation, behavior, and consciousness. That's a simple definition of psychoactive substances. And if I may continue, I'll tell you that with continuous consumption of these substances, they might control the users, they take charge of the user's life, and they force a person to waste a significant amount of time trying to obtain, to use, and recover from these substances. So when you use so much time using, recovering, and from the effect, you can, what time is left for your day-to-day activities? And with eventual use, these substances would actually be the central thing in that person's life. Now, let's talk about how much cannabis is used all over the world. Cannabis is the most widely used illicit psychoactive substance worldwide among people between ages 15 and 65 years. And studies have shown that it is usually associated with mental health problems. That means there's something in this cannabis that's making it so famous all over the world. And in Nigeria, let's come back home to discuss about our own dear country, Nigeria. A study done by Adamson and her colleagues in 2009 that was published in 2015 showed that 6.6% of Nigerians aged 15 to 64 years use cannabis. When we did the calculation, that's like 13.2 million use cannabis. It is either a study, a Risk Nation Office on Drug and Crime that was published in
We're sorry for that break. All right, go on, Dr. Koyeja, please.
Okay, I think I am now. Okay, thank you very much. I said a study done by Adamson et al. In the prevalence of cannabis use in Nigeria that was done in 2009 showed that 6.6%, that's 13.2 million Nigerians use cannabis in one form or the other. A more recent study that was done by United Nations Office on Drug and Crime that was published in 2018 showed that 10.8%, that's 21.6 million Nigerians use cannabis, either currently using or have used in the past 1 year. So you can see the almost 50% increase between 2009 and 2018. Okay, what's in this cannabis? What's that's making everybody want to use it? The plant has been there all these years, and the first time the first active component of cannabis was extracted was in 1899, which cannabinol was extracted. And in 1963, cannabidiol, which is a CBD, one of the culprits that's causing this debate of legalization or no legalization, was extracted. And by 1964, delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, that's the THC, was extracted. And another component is delta-8 tetrahydrocannabinol. But the two major substances in cannabis plants that is causing this debate and is the cannabidiol, that is CBD, that's shown to be medicinal, and the tetrahydrocannabinol, that is THC, that has effects on the brain as causing the dependence and that has the mental health side effects. So now, I'd like to come back home and talk about our own Yaba experience. I work in Federal Neuropsychiatric Hospital Yaba, and I'd like to discuss the Yaba experience to all of us. Among all my patients, there's one thing that's recurrent, that the mindset of the dealer is for them to keep coming back. So keep coming back is the philosophy of the dealer. And there are different brands they use. Well, in addition to what the MD has said, the other brands like Colorado, Skunk, Igbo, Weed, Loud, Kush, Mali. And I realized that the ones that have the synthetic cannabis, are the ones that cause the most psychosis. And studies have shown that synthetic cannabis has more of tetrahydrocannabinol. So the brands with delta 90 hydrocannabinol, which is majorly sold, has effect on the brain, thereby causing psychosis, anxiety, and depression in our patients. Documentation in the hospital has shown that 40 to 60% of patients that present to the hospital are currently using cannabis or have used cannabis in the past 1 month. And hereby is a 550-bedded hospital. We see over 800 patients outpatient per week. So you can imagine that number, that high number of patients that would see, and with 40 to 60% of them having their psychosis or mental illness related one way or the other to cannabis. And studies have further shown that cannabis use significantly increases the risk of development of psychotic illness in a dose-dependent manner. So the higher you take, the higher the severity of psychiatric illness. Despite strong linkage between mental illness and cannabis, not all users would come down with mental illness. So what is the cause of this? Well, like I said, we have a huge number of people with cannabis. And my question is, why join the crowd? Why join this number? Why increase the number? Why increase our own workload? And why increase the number of these people with psychosis? Let me talk a bit about the pathophysiology of cannabis, how cannabis works in the brain, because it's very important to understand how cannabis works for us to understand how the effects. Cannabis activates the brain cells because its chemical structure mimics a natural brain chemical. What cannabis does is that it folds the brain cells, the neurons, so it locks into the brain cells and super activates the nerve cells, and it will block the normal functioning or normal communication in the brain. So cannabis itself, all it does, it fools the brain cells and to actually work on the brain. Now, I want to talk about complications of cannabis. The first thing that we all know that WHO will always tell us that there's no health without mental health. So no matter how healthy other part of the body is, but if you're not mentally sound, if you're not mentally healthy, there is no health because it makes a mess of the whole thing. Well, the first complication I'll talk about is psychosis, depression, and anxiety. And when these three things happen, there's loss of social functioning, there's loss of career, there's loss of family life, that you can't continue your school, everything becomes nothing at this point in time. So you can just imagine life like that, and nothing else matters again. Well, because we have so much to say, I want to conclude on this. With this present political debate about the potential risk and benefits of cannabis use as a backdrop, the wave of legalization and liberalization initiative continues to spread. Legalizing cannabis for recreational use by adults and regulated for medical purposes. This policy change will trigger, and I said will trigger unintended medical and social consequences. There's need to inform the political discourse about this scientific evidence about cannabis use. And at this junction, I would like to pause for a while. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Koyejo, for that brilliant discussion in opening us up to on this topic that we're looking at today. I hear Dr. Koyejo says that there are about 426 chemical ingredients in cannabis, and you can imagine ingesting an ingredient that has 426 chemicals. Man, it's something. And then again, she now begin to look at the increase in usage from 2009 to 2018, and that's about 6% increase, and that has moved it from 1.2 million to 21.6 million. I know what was going on in my mind when she was reading that was, I don't know what it will be like in recent time, because it has obviously escalated, not just doubled, we are looking at escalation. All right, so for people who are not having sound or hearing us, please could you just click on the audio, just click on that audio, join audio. With that, you will be able to hear us. So from your end, please do that. Thank you so much. And like I said, if you can't hear us here, then you can join on the Facebook page. We would also be receiving this as live as it's coming from the Yaba Voice room now. All right, so thank you. Please note that you can drop your questions and your comments in the chat box. We would attend to as many as we can as we go on in this discussion. All right, so we're going over to Dr. Ayoride, Dr. Ganja, Dr. Potts, Dr. Weed, he has so much to give us. Over to you, Dr. Ayoride.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me. It's wonderful to be back in Nigeria, and I certainly owe so much of my career to Nigeria. Yaba rocks. So what I'll be doing today is talking about cannabis in Canada and giving you some insights. And why I'll be using these very specific examples is when people make reference to the fact that cannabis is now legal for use in Canada, are we referring to the same thing? So are we talking about the same person smoking cannabis under a bridge somewhere in Ebute Metta, or are we looking at something different? I'll start with my concluding comments, and that is, one, it requires a lot of infrastructure and investments to put a cannabis policy and legislation in place. Two, there's no single entity known as cannabis. It's like saying dog or car. It depends on what sort it is. And three, it's a very, very complicated process with a lot of money involved. So cannabis, can there be smoke without fire? And that will be something I'll be presenting virtually along the side of nearly a debate as well. I've got nothing, no conflict of interest. I don't own shares in the multi-billion-dollar cannabis industry here, and I do not have any cannabis in my bloodstream to the best of my knowledge. Now, cannabis in Canada is available. It's ubiquitous everywhere. If you go into the magazine rack, so this is just one of the local stores, magazine racks, it's everywhere. Magazines, women and weed, CBD, medical marijuana. So it's so ubiquitous, the average child can recognize the cannabis leaf symbol, and it changes the whole landscape of our discussions regarding cannabis. There are magazines, for instance, that even rank Canadian universities by use of cannabis. So not just by scholarly activity, but which universities smoke the most weed. I won't spend time on the legislation timeline, but what we can just know is it's been built up gradually over time, and it wasn't done overnight. The objective Canadian government was trying to do, and Health Canada, was to try and squeeze the black market by legislation with recreational cannabis and medical cannabis as well, with a view to, one, gaining tax income from it, but also to sort of standardize cannabis products and cannabis availability. Cannabis has been around for a long, long time, and even some of our industry in the pharmaceutical industry were in cannabis space in the 1800s. Then they faded out and they're coming back into it. So it's interesting that one of the companies listed here used to make antipsychotic medication. In Nigeria, and this is a map from 1962 showing plantations and where cannabis, Indian hemp, referred to more commonly in Nigeria at the time, where it was growing and seized. And we can see a high density in the west, south parts of Nigeria as of then. So some lessons from Canada. Well, when the legalization was being passed, there was very, very big areas of consideration. What will be the impact on smoking? Now, smoking in any form isn't good for health. What will be the impact on driving on road safety, education, the finance and economics? Would there be an additional burden on healthcare? policing, who polices the legal user and so on, and the implication then for living circumstances. And that was in 2018. In 2019, because the government phased into two bits, it was smoked cannabis in 2018, then edible or ingestible products in 2019, a year later, to allow for a better cannabis etiquette. There were then the introductions of edibles, beverages, drinks, concentrates, topical gels and creams, and a whole licensing supply chain. I won't spend time on this slide, but what it's meant to demonstrate is just how many steps people need to get licenses and accreditation, with spot checks and inspection and closure of licensed growers if they breach. But there's also a thriving black market as well. And this is a cannabis drive-through. Yes, not McDonald's, but cannabis. And can you imagine combining the word drive and cannabis, a cannabis drive-through where you can pick your OG Kush, Indica, Sativa, CBD, and then hit the road. In Canada at the moment, you can buy cannabis online and your postman will deliver. So it's a completely different context here, whereby some people actually have their cannabis delivered to their homes by the postman or through delivery services. So the weed man as referred to here is no longer the guy in the musty coat smelling of cannabis and so on, but people big in the industry wear snazzy suits now. A point I'm going to repeat several times, there's no single cannabis. And again, illustrated by even some of these leaves, there's no single cannabis. A big debate, and the language we use does matter significantly, because when we look at literature and debates going on in the US, Canada, and so on, and emerging in Nigeria, there's a big difference between what's referred to as industrial hemp and the broader range of cannabis products. And industrial hemp is when the THC, what we heard about earlier, the psychoactive component, is about 0.3% or less. So it's much, very, very low THC content. And this is used for a whole range of things: paper, textiles, twine, construction, food products, cosmetics, plastic, fuel, and so on. Another thing that's a common myth is we talk about cannabis because we recognize the leaf, but the leaf is actually not the most psychoactive part of the plant. Is the flowery top of the female plant. So the female plant is the queen in the world of cannabis and is the flowery top. The male plant is rather limp and impotent and nowhere does not have the sort of impact whatsoever. So it's the flowery top of the female plant that has the more psychoactive density of THC, delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. And this is what is found, those little vesicles at the top of the flowery plant are where the active component is. Right, you can't be in Nigeria without talking about pepper and tomato and so on. And I'm just going to go through the pepper and tomato of cannabis. So if we think of THC, delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, as like pepper, but there's no single type of pepper. There, Atarodo, Shombo, and the works. And likewise with cannabis. So there's no single type of pepper. And if we think of THC like pepper, then we can think of CBD like tomato, and there's no single type of tomato. And why it's really important here is the ratio. How much tomato and pepper do you have in what sort of concentrations? And that really influences the effect. A reminder, it's not the leaf. The leaf has gotten a lot of credit. It's the flowery top of the female plants that you can see here. So what does cannabis look like in North America, Canada, and the US? And some of these slides may surprise you because when we have these discussions, people think of things like this. But there's a lot more to cannabis than the joint. This is a cannabis product called shatter, and it's like a honeycomb with very high THC, up to 90%. We have sprays, and this is a cannabis product used for romance and love as a spray to cause a bit of euphoria. Cannabis-infused drinks, chocolates, mint, and that stingy person that never shares mint with you in the office may be using cannabis-infused mint. Cannabis-induced drinks, more chocolates. And here are some medical cannabis products. So each of these gels, the one that looks like cod liver oil and the different colored ones, are actually standardized cannabis products with different ratios of THC and CBD. And they've got colors so people can know the dose if they don't remember the chemical content. And other cannabis products, tea for infusion, pre-rolled joints, and a number of sprays. And there's a broad industry of cannabis seeds with different types of legacy that comes with them. In fact, there's a market for Canadian, well, I won't say it's, I was nearly going to say there's a market for Nigerian seeds as well. And the buds, the flowery top of the female plant, this is the bit that's often crushed and smoked or consumed in other ways. That's referred to as cannabis, but they're all very, very different. There's a whole industry with information, and these are apps that can be put on your phone to measure different bits of cannabis. The red device on the left is an infusing machine. So the cannabis is put at the top and it can drip into butter or anything else. It looks like a coffee machine, but it's not. And the other is a device for vaporizing. So how's cannabis consumed in Canada? Smoking is the most preferred option, but it's reducing and people are more cautious about smoking and smoking related risk of harm. Edible going up, vape pens and vaporizers. So smoking's going down, edibles going up, and this landscape continues to change. Does it matter? Yes, because about 27% of people in the Canadian Cannabis Survey said they'd used cannabis in the past 12 months. So cannabis use in Canada is huge. If you look at the bottom bits, many people have had their education compromised by to some degree as well. Frequency of use per day, you can see there are people up to 16% that use huge quantities every single day. And there are people who are stoned 6, 7, 8 hours a day. So this is a big issue. And if we come back to the question, can there be smoke without fire? What does it mean to be stoned 6, 7, 8 hours a day? People say, oh, well, in Canada, it's also being used for medical purposes. There's a great distinction between medical purposes and medically licensed products. So 76% or a large number used for medical purposes to help with sleep, appetite, nausea, and so on. But the majority actually do not have a medical document, meaning they're doing DIY. And within that DIY, we see a lot of accidents turning up in the hospitals. Testing here is very stringent, and every single plant product sold has a barcode and can be traced back to where it was grown. So if you can think of buying your tatache or shombo in the market in Yaba and being able to trace it to the plot of land it was grown in Nigeria. And here's the sort of standard sort testing certificates that test for herbicides, pesticides, and all sorts of chemicals that may have been in the cannabis. And this is standardized for every single product. So every single product has a certificate or license. So what's the health impact? 1 in 20 hospital stays among youth in Canada were related to harmful substance use. 1 in 20. 7 in 10 of hospital stays by Canadian youth were involved substance that's drug use and a concurrent or and a mental health condition. 7 in 10. So we're looking at the future of a whole nation and young people. The most common substance associated with hospital stay among Canadian youth, 40% was cannabis. 40% being the commonest cause variable in admission to hospital, a lot more than alcohol. The next slide actually looks at our early psychosis program, and this is a program for young people who are developing a psychotic illness. So they may be hearing voices, having belief systems that aren't in keeping with reality and so on. And the majority of men, nearly 83% said they used cannabis amongst people who were having early psychosis. 83%. About nearly 70% tested positive for cannabis. So it's not as if they were just doing bragado or talking. They actually tested positive in their urine when we investigated. And nearly 70% were below the age of 25. 13.5% didn't finish high school. So we're looking at really critical years. Why does the age 25 matter? For a number of reasons. The brain continues to mature till about the age of 25. So these are critical years of brain development. The blue curve here are young people who've had psychosis from cannabis use compared to the rest of the country. And you can see that they're way more than the general population of their peers. This slide should be very interesting and a big concern. This was before cannabis legalization in Canada. And you can see that by the age of around 12, about 2% of Canadian school students said they've been using cannabis. By the age of 17, nearly 40%. So you can see a big acceleration in cannabis use. And this has implications for education, driving, behaviors in school, and future health. We know about 25%, 3/4 of mental disorders, our 75% of mental disorders have their genesis before the age of 24, 25. So youth mental health and cannabis is a critical consideration. It's something we need to advocate about. And this was in the parliamentary newspaper then when cannabis was about to be legalized in Canada. And I got quite stuck in with opinion editorials, time for higher education, better knowledge about cannabis, and so on. And as health professionals amongst us, it's really important that we're part of these legislative debates to guide information. The concern about young people, is it new? No, because this is 1892 to 1893, and we can see 21 to 25-year-olds were developing then what was known as Indian hemp insanity. So it's not new, and have we learned anything over the centuries? There are differences in the effect of smoking and eating edible, and this is an area where in Canada, we're beginning to have to learn a lot more as people are shifting from smoking to edibles because it has a major difference in the effects. So for our physician colleagues and mental and health professionals, lessons from Canada, literacy wasn't great at the time of legislation. Public awareness literacy wasn't great either. Clinicians had to change their use of language about criminal use because you couldn't say, oh, you'll get in trouble with the law. There might be lawful users. And we had to accept that there was widely available. In Canada, by law, you can have up to 4 plants per household. And at any point in time, you can have up to 30 grams of cannabis on your person. Here's a product label for cannabis as well. And it comes with packaging and label and warning of the health risks and harms. This is available online, looking at safety considerations for cannabinoid-based medicine as well, should people be interested. But the point I make here is the issue to do with cannabis is extremely complex. There are complex effects. The impact on youth, particularly those with developing brains, can be considerable. It does happen to everyone, but the effect is devastating. We see large numbers of Nigerian students studying in Canada, the US, the UK, but more so in Canada, who use cannabis to try and socialize and belong and end up massively psychotic. So can there be smoke without fire? Well, amongst Nigerian youth, a word of caution. So as Nigeria debates legislation, are we talking industrial hemp or are we talking cannabis products with THC? And what I would say is it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. A lot needs to be invested in it. Cannabis awareness needs to go up considerably to inform it. And there are many lessons, maybe this will come up in the Q&A, that can be learned from Canadian experience, because there hasn't been, it's not been just smoke without fire. Cannabis use disorder has gone up significantly. COVID has made it go up even more. Health services aren't sufficiently prepared to deal with the complexity. Cannabis literacy amongst health professionals is still quite low, and the resourcing in some areas limited. Thank you. I'll stop sharing my slides.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yarinde. He has given us lots of information. I was just in my head, it's rumbling and bubbling, and I'm wondering, where do we start from all of this? Yes, in